The acrid smell of gunpowder still clung to Andre Coleman's uniform as he stood before the mirror, adjusting his medals with trembling fingers. The echoes of distant explosions and the cries of wounded comrades lingered in his mind, a stark contrast to the pristine silence of his quarters. He took a deep breath, steadying himself for the awards ceremony that lay ahead. "You ready for this, brother?" Elliot Brooks' voice cut through Andre's thoughts as he appeared in the doorway, his own uniform crisp and immaculate. Andre turned, a wry smile playing on his lips. "As ready as I'll ever be. You know how these things go." Elliot's eyes narrowed, sensing the undercurrent of tension in his friend's voice. "Hey, this time it's different. You save half our unit out there. They can't ignore that. They've managed to ignore plenty before," Andre muttered, his gaze dropping to the floor. The two men made their way through the bustling corridors of the base, the air thick with anticipation. As they approached the ceremony hall, Andre's steps faltered. Elliot placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "In the land of freedom, how free are we really?" Elliot's voice was low, meant only for Andre's ears. "If merit can't see past skin, what are we even fighting for?" Andre's jaw clenched, but he remained silent. The words hit too close to home, echoing the doubts that had plagued him throughout his military career. As they entered the hall, a sea of faces turned towards them. Andre scanned the crowd, his heart lifting as he spotted his family. His mother, Miriam, beamed with pride, while his father, Jasper, stood tall and stoic. Beside them, his sister Tara bounced on her toes, barely containing her excitement. Colonel Victor Langston took the stage, his voice booming through the speakers. "Today, we gather to honor the bravest among us, those who have gone above and beyond the call of duty." Andre straightened his back, his pulse quickening. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. As Langston began reading out names, Andre felt a surge of hope. But as medal after medal was awarded, that hope began to waver. He glanced at Elliot, who wore a look of growing disbelief. Finally, Langston reached the last name on his list. It wasn't Andre's. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Andre stood frozen, his mind reeling. He had led the charge, risked his life to save his fellow soldiers. How could they overlook that? As the ceremony concluded, Andre felt a gentle touch on his arm. He turned to see his mother, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Baby, I'm so proud of you," Miriam whispered, pulling him into a tight embrace. Jasper's hand landed heavily on Andre's shoulder. "You're a hero, son. Don't let anyone tell you different." Tara's voice cut through the moment, sharp with indignation. "This is bullshit, Andre. You can't let them get away with this." "Tara," Miriam admonished, but her own voice lacked conviction. Andre's gaze drifted across the room, landing on Colonel Langston. The older man's eyes met his for a brief moment before quickly looking away. In that instant, Andre saw something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't just oversight or bureaucratic error. There was something more insidious at play. Elliot appeared at Andre's side, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "This isn't right, man. You know it, I know it, everyone here knows it." Andre nodded slowly, his mind racing. He had always believed in the system, in the ideals of honor and merit. But now, standing in the aftermath of this blatant injustice, he felt those beliefs crumbling. As the crowd began to disperse, Andre caught snippets of hushed conversations. "Can't believe they passed him over. Best soldier in the unit. Wonder if it's because..." The unspoken words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Lieutenant Grace Harlow approached, her face a mixture of sympathy and barely concealed anger. "Sergeant Coleman, I don't know what to say. Your actions in the field were exemplary. This decision, it doesn't make sense." Andre managed a tight smile. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I appreciate that." As Grace walked away, Andre overheard her muttering to another officer. "It's not the first time Langston's done something like this. Remember Johnson last year? And Rodriguez before that?" The pieces began to fall into place, painting a picture that Andre had long suspected, but never wanted to believe. The system he had dedicated his life to, the ideals he had fought for, were tainted by the very prejudice he had hoped to overcome. Jasper's quiet voice broke through Andre's thoughts. Son, sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought on the battlefield. They're fought right here at home. Andre looked at his father, seeing the weight of years of similar struggles in the older man's eyes. He nodded, a new resolve forming in his chest. You're right, Dad, and it's time someone took a stand. As the family made their way out of the hall, Andre's mind was already formulating a plan. He would not let this injustice stand, not for himself, and not for all the others who had faced similar discrimination. The spark of rebellion had been ignited, and Andre Coleman was ready to fan it into a flame that would illuminate the darkest corners of systemic bias. The real battle was just beginning. The drive home from the base was thick with tension. Andre sat in the back seat of his parents' car, his jaw clenched, staring out the window at the passing landscape. The silence was broken only by Tara's occasional outbursts of indignation. I can't believe they did that to you, Andre, she fumed, her fists clenched in her lap. After everything you've done, all the risks you've taken, it's not fair. Miriam turned in her seat, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and concern. Baby, we know you deserve that recognition, but sometimes life isn't fair. What matters is how you respond to it. Andre nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the image of Colonel Langston's face, that fleeting moment of, what? Guilt? Contempt? He couldn't be sure, but he knew something wasn't right. As they pulled into the driveway of the Coleman family home, Andre's phone buzzed. It was a message from Elliot. Hey man, you okay? This isn't over. We're not letting this slide. Inside, the family gathered in the living room. Jasper, who had been quiet throughout the drive, finally spoke. Son, I've seen this kind of thing before. It doesn't make it right, but you can't let it break you. Andre looked at his father, seeing the weight of years of similar struggles in the older man's eyes. I know, Dad, but I thought things were different now. You thought your uniform would protect you from the same old prejudices, Jasper finished for him. But sometimes, son, it just makes you a bigger target. Tara jumped up, her eyes blazing. So, what, we just accept it? Roll over and let them treat us like this? No way. Andre, you have to fight this. Miriam placed a calming hand on her daughter's shoulder. Tara, it's not that simple. Andre's career could be at risk if he makes waves. So what? Tara shot back. His career is already at risk if they're passing him over for awards he deserves. As his family debated around him, Andre's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Lieutenant Grace Harlow. Sergeant Coleman, I hope you're doing okay. I've been thinking about what happened. There's something you should know. Can we meet tomorrow? Andre's curiosity was piqued. He replied, agreeing to meet Grace at a coffee shop near the base the next morning. That night, sleep eluded Andre. He tossed and turned, replaying the ceremony in his mind. The look on Langston's face, the whispers in the crowd, the weight of the medals he should have received pressing against his chest like phantom limbs. As dawn broke, Andre found himself sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. Miriam joined him, her robe wrapped tightly around her. Couldn't sleep? She asked softly. Andre shook his head. Mom, I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to let it go, to just keep my head down and do my job. But another part knows that if you don't stand up, nothing will ever change, Miriam finished for him. She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. Andre, you've always been a fighter, not just on the battlefield, but in life. Whatever you decide, we're behind you. Later that morning, Andre sat across from Grace in the bustling coffee shop. The young lieutenant looked nervous, her eyes darting around as if checking for eavesdroppers. Sergeant Coleman, she began, her voice low. What happened yesterday? It's not an isolated incident. There's been talk, rumors really, about Colonel Langston for years. Andre leaned forward, his interest piqued. What kind of rumors? Grace took a deep breath. That he's been systematically overlooking minority soldiers for promotions, awards, you name it. But no one's ever been able to prove anything. He's too careful, too connected. Andre felt a surge of anger mixed with a grim sense of validation. So it's not just me. No, Grace confirmed. It's not just you. And it's not just Langston. He's just a symptom of a bigger problem. As they continued to talk, Andre's resolve began to solidify. He thought of his parents, of Tara, of all the other soldiers who had faced similar discrimination. He thought of the ideals he had sworn to uphold when he joined the military. By the time he left the coffee shop, Andre had made his decision. He wouldn't let this injustice stand. Not for himself, and not for all the others who had faced similar discrimination. As he walked back to his car, Andre's phone rang. It was Elliot. "Andre, man, you're not going to believe this. I was just talking to some of the guys from Baker Company. Turns out Langston's been pulling this crap for years. Johnson from last year? Rodriguez before that? It's all part of a pattern." Andre's grip tightened on his phone. "Elliot, I think it's time we did something about this." "You with me?" "Always, brother," Elliot replied without hesitation. "What's the plan?" As Andre drove home, his mind raced with possibilities. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, that he might be risking everything he had worked for. But he also knew that some fights were worth the risk. The spark of rebellion that had been ignited at the ceremony was now a burning flame. Andre Coleman was ready to shine a light on the darkness of systemic bias, no matter the cost. The real battle was just beginning, and he was prepared to face it head-on. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the base as Andre made his way to his unit's headquarters. His mind raced with the information Grace had shared and the decision that lay before him. As he approached the building, he spotted Lieutenant Harlow waiting for him, her face etched with concern. "Sergeant Coleman," she greeted him, her voice low. "Have you given any thought to what we discussed?" Andre nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I have, Lieutenant, and I think it's time we did something about this." Grace's eyes widened. "You're sure? You know the risks, right? This could impact your entire career." "I know," Andre replied, his voice steady. "But if we don't stand up now, when will we? How many more soldiers will face the same discrimination?" As they talked, more soldiers began to arrive for the day's duties. Andre noticed the sideways glances, the hushed conversations. News of his snub at the awards ceremony had spread like wildfire. Elliot jogged up, clapping Andre on the shoulder. "Hey man, you ready for this?" Andre took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." The three of them made their way to Major Jackson Rivera's office. Andre's heart pounded as he knocked on the door. "Enter," came the gruff response. Major Rivera looked up from his desk, his eyebrows raising slightly at the sight of the three soldiers. "Coleman, Brooks, Harlow, what can I do for you?" Andre stepped forward, his back straight, his voice clear. "Sir, we need to talk about what happened at the awards ceremony. And not just about me. There's a pattern of discrimination that needs to be addressed." Rivera leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "That's a serious accusation, Coleman. Are you prepared to back it up?" For the next hour, Andre, Elliot, and Grace laid out everything they knew. The overlooked promotions, the biased award selections, the whispered comments, and veiled threats. As they spoke, Rivera's expression grew increasingly grave. When they finished, the major was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "I've suspected something like this for a while, but I never had enough evidence to act on it. You realize that by bringing this forward, you're putting yourselves in the line of fire." Andre nodded. "We do, sir, but it's the right thing to do." Rivera stood up, pacing behind his desk. "All right, I'll support you in this, but we need to do this by the book. No shortcuts, no accusations without proof. We're going up against a system that's been in place for a long time. It won't be easy." As they left Rivera's office, Andre felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The wheels were in motion now, and there was no turning back. Over the next few days, Andre and his allies worked tirelessly to gather evidence. They interviewed other soldiers, combed through personnel records, and documented every instance of bias they could find. One evening, as Andre was poring over a stack of files in his quarters, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find Tara standing there, her eyes blazing with determination. "I heard what you're doing," she said without preamble. "I want to help." Andre hesitated. "Tara, this could get messy. I don't want you to get caught up in it." His sister crossed her arms, fixing him with a steely glare. "I'm already caught up in it, Andre. This affects all of us. Besides, I've got some skills that might come in handy." Despite his reservations, Andre couldn't help but smile at his sister's determination. Right, come on in. We could use all the help we can get. As the days passed, word of Andre's efforts began to spread. Some soldiers came forward with their own stories, while others warned him to back off. The atmosphere on the base grew tense, with lines being drawn and sides taken. Colonel Langston, meanwhile, seemed to sense the growing threat. Andre noticed the older officer watching him more closely. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. One afternoon, as Andre was leaving the mess hall, Langston cornered him in a deserted corridor. "Coleman," he said, his voice low and menacing, "I hope you know what you're doing. Some battles aren't worth fighting. You've got a promising career ahead of you. Don't throw it away on some misguided crusade." Andre met the colonel's gaze steadily. "With all due respect, sir, I believe this battle is worth fighting. And I'm not the only one who thinks so." Langston's face darkened. "Watch yourself, Sergeant. You're playing a dangerous game." As the colonel stalked away, Andre felt a chill run down his spine. But instead of fear, he felt his resolve strengthen. He knew now, more than ever, that what he was doing was necessary. That night, Andre called a meeting with Elliot, Grace, Tara, and a few other trusted allies. They gathered in a quiet corner of the base, away from prying eyes and ears. "We're at a crossroads," Andre began, looking around at the determined faces before him. "What we do next could change everything. Not just for us, but for every soldier who comes after us. Are we ready for that?" Elliot spoke up first. "I'm with you, brother. All the way." Grace nodded. "We've come too far to back down now." Tara's voice was fierce. "Let's show them what real courage looks like." As the others voiced their support, Andre felt a surge of emotion. This was more than just about him now. It was about justice, about changing a system that had failed too many for too long. "All right," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "Tomorrow, we file the formal complaint. We bring everything we've found to light. No matter what happens next, we stand together." As the meeting broke up, Andre stood alone for a moment, looking up at the star-filled sky. He thought of his parents, of the values they had instilled in him. He thought of all the soldiers who had faced discrimination in silence. And he knew with absolute certainty that he was doing the right thing. The battle for justice was about to begin in earnest, and Andre Coleman was ready to lead the charge. The base buzzed with tension as news of Andre's formal complaint spread like wildfire. Soldiers whispered in corners, eyes darting nervously as superior officers passed by. Andre felt the weight of countless stares as he made his way to Major Rivera's office, his stride purposeful despite the knot in his stomach. As he entered, Rivera looked up from a stack of papers, his face etched with concern. "Coleman, you've stirred up one hell of a hornet's nest. Are you prepared for what's coming?" Andre nodded, his jaw set. "Yes, sir. I have to see this through." Rivera sighed, rubbing his temples. "The brass is taking this seriously. There's going to be a full investigation. Colonel Langston is already on the warpath, trying to discredit you." As if on cue, a commotion erupted outside. The door burst open, revealing a red-faced Colonel Langston. "This is outrageous," Langston bellowed, his eyes blazing as they fixed on Andre. Baseless accusations from a soldier who couldn't handle not getting a medal. "I'll have you court-martialed for this, Coleman." Major Rivera stood, his voice calm but firm. "Colonel, this is neither the time nor the place. The investigation will proceed according to protocol." Langston's face twisted with rage. "You're backing this troublemaker?" "I'm backing the truth, sir," Rivera replied evenly. "Wherever it may lead." As Langston stormed out, Andre felt a mix of fear and determination. The battle lines were clearly drawn now. Over the next few days, the investigation team descended on the base. Andre, Elliot, and Grace found themselves spending hours in interviews, recounting every instance of bias they'd witnessed or experienced. Other soldiers came forward too, some eager to share their stories, others reluctant and fearful. One evening, as Andre was leaving the investigation team's makeshift office, he found Tara waiting for him, her face alight with excitement. "Andre, you won't believe what I found," she exclaimed, pulling him aside. I've been digging through some old base records. There's a pattern here going back years. Promotions, awards, even disciplinary actions. They all show a clear bias against minority soldiers. Andre's eyes widened. Tara, that's incredible. But how did you get access to those records? His sister grinned mischievously. Let's just say I have my ways. The question is, what are you going to do with this information? Before Andre could respond, a shadow fell over them. They turned to find Colonel Langston looming nearby, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Snooping through classified records are we, he sneered. I always knew you were trouble, Coleman. But dragging your family into this? That's a new low. Andre stepped protectively in front of Tara. Sir, with all due respect, the only low here is the systemic discrimination that's been allowed to fester under your command. Langston's eyes narrowed dangerously. Watch yourself, Sergeant. You're playing a game you can't win. I've weathered storms far worse than you. As the colonel stalked away, Tara turned to Andre, her face pale but determined. We can't let him intimidate us. We have to use this information. Andre nodded, his mind racing. You're right, but we need to be smart about it. Let's gather the others. That night, Andre, Tara, Elliot, Grace, and a few trusted allies met in secret. They pored over the evidence Tara had uncovered, piecing together a damning picture of long-standing discrimination. This is bigger than just Langston, Grace said, her voice hushed. It's an entire system designed to keep certain people down. Elliot nodded grimly, and they're not going to give up that power without a fight. As they strategized late into the night, Andre felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every soldier who had ever been overlooked, every dream that had been crushed by prejudice. The next morning, as Andre was heading to meet with the investigation team, he was intercepted by Major Rivera. Coleman, a word, Rivera said, pulling him aside. Things are heating up. The Secretary of Defense has caught wind of this investigation. She's taking a personal interest. Andre's heart raced. Is that good or bad, sir? Rivera's expression was unreadable. That depends on what we find and how we handle it. The eyes of the entire military might soon be on us. As Andre walked away, his mind whirling, he spotted Colonel Langston across the quad, deep in conversation with a group of senior officers. Their eyes met, and Langston's gaze was filled with cold fury. The investigation was reaching a boiling point. Andre knew that the next few days would be crucial. Everything he had worked for, everything he believed in, was on the line. That evening, as Andre sat alone in his quarters, staring at the evidence they had gathered, he heard a soft knock at the door. He opened it to find his parents standing there, concern etched on their faces. We heard what's happening, Miriam said, pulling him into a tight embrace. Are you okay, baby? Jasper placed a strong hand on Andre's shoulder. We're proud of you, son, no matter what happens. As Andre hugged his parents, he felt a surge of strength. He knew the fight ahead would be hard, but with the truth on his side and the support of those who believed in him, he was ready to face whatever came next. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the military establishment. And Andre Coleman was at the center of it all, a beacon of hope for change in a system long overdue for reform. The base was in a state of barely contained chaos. News of Secretary of Defense Lillian Moore's impending visit had sent shockwaves through the ranks. Soldiers scurried about, polishing every surface to a mirror shine, while officers huddled in tense meetings, their faces drawn with worry. Andre stood at attention in the sweltering heat, his uniform crisp despite the beads of sweat forming on his brow. Beside him, Elliot and Grace maintained equally rigid postures, their eyes fixed on the horizon where the secretary's helicopter was due to appear at any moment. You ready for this? Elliot muttered out of the corner of his mouth. Andre gave an almost imperceptible nod. As ready as I'll ever be. The distant thrum of rotors cut through the air, growing louder with each passing second. As the sleek black helicopter touched down, kicking up a cloud of dust, Andre felt his heart hammering in his chest. Secretary Moore emerged, her presence commanding immediate respect. Her sharp eyes scanned the assembled soldiers, lingering for a moment on Andre. He met her gaze steadily, sensing that this woman held the power to change everything. Colonel Langston stepped forward, his face a mask of forced pleasantry. "Madam Secretary, welcome to Dash." "Thank you, Colonel." Moore cut him off smoothly. "I'd like to speak with Sergeant Coleman and his colleagues immediately." Langston's smile faltered. "Of course, Madam Secretary. Right this way." As they were led to a private conference room, Andre caught sight of Tara watching from a distance, giving him a subtle thumbs up. He drew strength from his sister's unwavering support. Once inside, Secretary Moore wasted no time. "Sergeant Coleman, I've read your complaint and the subsequent investigation reports. I must say, I'm deeply troubled by what I've seen." Andre straightened his shoulders. "Thank you for taking the time to address this, Madam Secretary." Moore's gaze was piercing. "Tell me, in your own words, what's really going on here?" For the next hour, Andre, Elliot, and Grace laid out everything they had uncovered. The pattern of discrimination, the manipulated awards, the subtle and not-so-subtle threats. As they spoke, Moore's expression grew increasingly grave. "This goes beyond just your base," she said finally. "We're seeing similar reports across multiple branches of the military. It's a systemic issue that needs to be addressed at the highest levels." Andre felt a surge of hope. "What do you plan to do, Madam Secretary?" Moore stood, pacing the room. "I'm implementing immediate reforms. A complete overhaul of the awards and promotion system, with checks and balances to ensure fairness. Mandatory bias training for all personnel. And a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. This was more than they had dared to hope for. "Furthermore," Moore continued, "I'm establishing an independent oversight committee to monitor these changes and ensure they're being properly implemented." As they left the conference room, Andre felt a mix of elation and trepidation. They had won a significant victory, but he knew the fight was far from over. Outside, they were met by a sea of curious faces. Word had spread quickly, and soldiers of all ranks were gathered, waiting to hear what had transpired. Colonel Langston pushed his way through the crowd, his face mottled with rage. "This is preposterous. You can't possibly believe the words of a few disgruntled soldiers over years of established protocol." Secretary Moore turned to him, her voice icy. "Colonel, I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. The evidence speaks for itself." As Langston sputtered, unable to form a coherent response, Moore addressed the assembled soldiers. "Change is coming, and it's long overdue. From this day forward, every soldier will be judged solely on their merit and their actions. No exceptions." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Andre could see a mix of emotions on the faces around him. Hope, disbelief, anger, relief. Moore wasn't finished. "And to kick off these reforms, I'm introducing a new commendation. The Courage and Integrity Medal, to be awarded to those who show exceptional bravery, not just on the battlefield, but in standing up for what's right within our ranks." Her eyes found Andre. "Sergeant Coleman, your actions have brought to light issues that have plagued our military for far too long. Your courage in speaking out, despite the personal risk, embodies the very spirit of this new award. It would be my honor to present you with the first Courage and Integrity Medal." The crowd erupted in a mix of cheers and shocked whispers. Andre stood, stunned, as the reality of what was happening washed over him. As Secretary Moore pinned the medal to his chest, she spoke quietly, for his ears alone. "This fight isn't over, Sergeant. We're going to need men like you to see these changes through. Are you up for it?" Andre met her gaze, his resolve strengthening. "Yes, Madam Secretary. Whatever it takes." As the day drew to a close, Andre found himself surrounded by his family and closest allies. Tara hugged him fiercely, while his parents beamed with pride. Elliot clapped him on the back, and Grace smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be resistance, setbacks, and challenges. But as Andre looked around at the faces of those who had stood by him, he knew that together they could bring about real, lasting change. The fight for equality in the military had gained a powerful ally in Secretary Moore, and a symbol of hope in Andre Coleman. The winds of change were blowing, and nothing would ever be the same again. The day of the public hearing dawned with an electric tension in the air. The base's largest auditorium had been transformed into a makeshift courtroom, packed to capacity with soldiers, officers, and civilian observers. At the center of it all sat Andre Coleman, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Beside him, Elliot and Grace offered silent support, their presence a bulwark against the storm that was about to break. In the front row, Andre's family watched with a mixture of pride and apprehension. Tara's fingers were crossed so tightly her knuckles had turned white. As the hearing commenced, Secretary Moore's voice cut through the hushed murmurs. "We are here today to address serious allegations of systemic bias and discrimination within our armed forces. Sergeant Andre Coleman, please step forward and share your testimony." Andre rose, his heart pounding, but his resolve unshakable. As he approached the podium, he caught Colonel Langston's eye. The older man's face was a mask of barely contained fury. Taking a deep breath, Andre began. "I stand before you today, not just as a soldier, but as a man who believes in the ideals our country was founded upon. Equality, justice, and the right to be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin." He recounted the events of the past few months, the overlooked award, the pattern of discrimination he and others had uncovered, the threats and intimidation they had faced. With each word, the tension in the room grew palpable. "This isn't about one award or one man's hurt feelings," Andre continued, his voice gaining strength. "This is about a systemic problem that has been allowed to fester for far too long. How many talented soldiers have we lost because they were never given a fair chance? How many lives have been impacted by this insidious bias?" As Andre spoke, he could see the impact of his words rippling through the audience. Some nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. When he finished, there was a moment of profound silence before Secretary Moore spoke again. "Thank you, Sergeant Coleman. Colonel Langston, you may now present your defense." Langston strode to the podium, his face flushed with anger. "This is nothing more than a witch hunt," he spat. "A few disgruntled soldiers trying to blame their own shortcomings on imagined slights. I have served this country with honor for decades, and I refuse to let my reputation be tarnished by these baseless accusations." But as Langston continued his defense, cracks began to appear in his facade. His explanations for the discrepancies in promotions and awards grew increasingly convoluted. When presented with the evidence Tara had uncovered, he stumbled, unable to provide a satisfactory explanation. The turning point came when Lieutenant Grace Harlow took the stand. Her voice trembling but determined, she shared her own experiences of discrimination and the subtle ways she had been held back in her career. "It wasn't just one incident," she said, her eyes meeting Andre's across the room. "It was 1,000 little cuts, being passed over for assignments, hearing whispered comments, always feeling like I had to work twice as hard just to be seen as equal." As Grace spoke, something remarkable began to happen. Other soldiers, emboldened by her courage, stood up one by one to share their own stories. A chorus of voices, long silenced, finally found the strength to speak out. Colonel Langston's face grew increasingly pale as the testimonies mounted. His attempts to interject were silenced by Secretary Moore, who watched the proceedings with a grave expression. As the day wore on, the weight of evidence became overwhelming. The pattern of discrimination was clear, stretching back years and affecting countless soldiers. Finally, Secretary Moore called for order. "In light of the testimony and evidence presented here today, I am ordering the immediate suspension of Colonel Victor Langston, pending a full investigation into his conduct. Furthermore, a comprehensive review of all promotion and award decisions made under his command will be undertaken." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Andre felt a surge of emotions: relief, vindication, and a sobering realization of the magnitude of what they had accomplished. As the hearing concluded, Andre found himself surrounded by a sea of faces, some offering congratulations, others apologies for not speaking up sooner. Through the crowd, he spotted Colonel Langston being escorted out, the older man's shoulders slumped in defeat. Elliot clapped Andre on the back, his face split in a wide grin. You did it, man. You actually did it. Grace approached, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Thank you, she said simply, embracing Andre tightly. As the crowd began to disperse, Andre felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find his father, Jasper, standing there, his usual stoic expression softened with pride. You stood tall today, son, Jasper said, his voice gruff with emotion. You stood tall for all of us. Andre nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He had taken on a system that had seemed immovable, and against all odds, he had won. But as he looked around at the faces of his fellow soldiers, some jubilant, others uncertain about what the future held, he knew that this was just the beginning. The real work of change lay ahead, and Andre Coleman was ready to lead the charge. The base hummed with anticipation as soldiers and officers alike gathered for what was being hailed as a historic ceremony. The aftermath of the public hearing had sent shockwaves through the military establishment, and today marked the beginning of a new era. Andre Coleman stood at attention, his uniform crisp and immaculate. Beside him, Elliot and Grace wore expressions of barely contained excitement. In the front row, Andre's family beamed with pride, Miriam dabbing at her eyes, Jasper standing tall, and Tara practically bouncing in her seat. Secretary of Defense Lillian Moore took the stage, her presence commanding immediate respect. Today, she began, her voice ringing out clear and strong. We stand at a crossroads in our military's history. We have been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about bias and discrimination within our ranks. But from this challenge, we have the opportunity to emerge stronger, more united, and more just than ever before. As Moore spoke about the sweeping reforms being implemented across all branches of the military, Andre felt a surge of emotion. The past few months had been a whirlwind of struggle and triumph, and now it was all coming to fruition. To symbolize our commitment to these changes, Moore continued, we are introducing a new commendation. The Courage and Integrity Medal will be awarded to those who demonstrate exceptional bravery, not just on the battlefield, but in standing up for what is right within our own ranks. A murmur of anticipation rippled through the crowd. Andre's heart began to race as he realized what was coming. It is my great honor, Moore said, her eyes finding Andre in the crowd, to present the first Courage and Integrity Medal to Sergeant Andre Coleman. His unwavering commitment to justice, his bravery in the face of adversity, and his dedication to creating a more equitable military embody everything this medal represents. As Andre made his way to the stage, the auditorium erupted in applause. He caught glimpses of faces in the crowd, fellow soldiers who had shared their stories, officers who had initially doubted him but now looked on with respect, and even a few who still seemed skeptical but couldn't deny the change that was happening. Standing before Secretary Moore, Andre felt the weight of the moment. As she pinned the medal to his chest, Moore spoke quietly, for his ears alone. You've started something remarkable, Sergeant Coleman. The road ahead won't be easy, but you've given hope to countless others. Wear this with pride. Andre's voice was thick with emotion as he addressed the crowd. This medal isn't just for me, he said, his eyes scanning the faces before him. It's for every soldier who has ever felt overlooked or undervalued. It's for those who came before us and faced discrimination with quiet dignity. And it's for the future generations who will serve in a military that truly values every individual based on their merit and character. As he spoke, Andre could see the impact of his words. Some soldiers stood straighter, pride evident in their bearing. Others nodded in agreement, their eyes shining with newfound hope. But our work isn't done, Andre continued, his voice gaining strength. This medal and these reforms are just the beginning. It's up to all of us to ensure that the changes we've fought for take root and flourish. We must remain vigilant, supporting one another and holding ourselves and our leaders accountable. The ceremony concluded with a standing ovation, the sound of applause thunderous in the packed auditorium. As Andre made his way back to his seat, he was engulfed in a sea of congratulations and well wishes. Elliot pulled him into a bear hug. You did it, man. You really did it. Grace's eyes were brimming with tears as she squeezed his hand. Thank you, she whispered. For all of us. As the crowd began to disperse, Andre found himself face to face with Major Rivera. The older man's expression was a mix of pride and something that looked almost like awe. "Coleman," Rivera said, his voice gruff with emotion, "I've served for over 2 decades, and I've never seen anything like what you've accomplished. You've changed the game, son." Andre nodded, feeling the weight of the medal on his chest and the responsibility it represented. "Thank you, sir. But this is just the beginning." As Andre finally made his way to his family, he was enveloped in a group hug. Tara was practically vibrating with excitement. "Andre, you're a hero. A real-life hero." Jasper placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Your grandfather would have been so proud to see this day," he said softly. Miriam cupped Andre's face in her hands. "My brave, beautiful boy," she murmured. "You've done so much good." As the day drew to a close, Andre found a quiet moment to himself. He stood looking out over the base, the medal gleaming on his chest. The enormity of what had been accomplished and what still lay ahead washed over him. The military would never be the same again. There would be challenges and resistance, old habits and prejudices to overcome. But for the first time in a long time, there was real hope for change. Andre Coleman had set out to right a personal injustice and ended up sparking a revolution. As he watched the sun set on this momentous day, he knew that the dawn would bring new battles to fight, new wrongs to right. And he was ready for whatever came next. The fight for equality and justice was far from over, but today marked a turning point. And Andre was proud to be at the forefront of this new era in military history. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the base as Andre made his way to his new office. It had been 3 months since the award ceremony, and the military was still adjusting to the sweeping changes that had followed. As he walked, Andre noticed the subtle differences. More diverse faces in leadership positions, a new openness in conversations between soldiers of different backgrounds, and a palpable sense of hope in the air. Stepping into the conference room, Andre was greeted by the sight of the task force he now led. Secretary Moore had personally asked him to head this group, charged with implementing and overseeing the new reforms across all branches of the military. The faces around the table reflected the diversity they were fighting for. Men and women of various ethnicities, backgrounds, and ranks, all united in their commitment to change. "Good morning, everyone," Andre began, his voice carrying the quiet confidence he had developed over the past months. "Let's get started on today's agenda." As they delved into discussions about new training programs, revised promotion criteria, and accountability measures, Andre felt a surge of pride. This was the real work, the day-to-day effort required to turn lofty ideals into concrete reality. Midway through the meeting, there was a knock at the door. Andre's assistant poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, sir, but there's a call for you. It's your sister, Tara. She says it's urgent." Excusing himself, Andre stepped out to take the call. Tara's voice came through, bubbling with excitement. "Andre, I got in. I got accepted to the military academy." Andre's face split into a wide grin. "Tara, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you." As Tara shared her news, Andre felt a wave of emotion wash over him. His little sister, following in his footsteps, but entering a military that was actively working to be better, fairer, more inclusive. This was why he had fought so hard. Returning to the meeting, Andre shared the news with his team. The room erupted in congratulations, and Andre was struck by how much things had changed. Just months ago, Tara's acceptance might have been met with skepticism or quiet resentment from some quarters. Now, there was genuine celebration of her achievement. As the day wore on, Andre found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The initial pain of being overlooked, the fear of speaking out, the grueling fight for justice. It had all led to this moment. Later that evening, as Andre was preparing to leave, he received a message from Secretary Moore. She was visiting the base the next day and wanted to meet with him personally. The following morning, Andre stood at attention as Secretary Moore entered his office. Her face bore the signs of someone carrying great responsibility, but her eyes were bright with determination. "At ease, Sergeant Coleman," she said warmly. Or should I say, Major Coleman? Andre's eyes widened in surprise. Ma'am, Moore smiled. Your promotion has been approved. Your leadership on this task force has been exemplary, and we need more officers like you as we move forward with these reforms. As the news sank in, Moore continued. But that's not the only reason I'm here. I wanted to personally thank you, Andre. What you started here, it's spreading. We're seeing changes across all branches in bases around the world. You've sparked a revolution. Andre felt a lump form in his throat. Thank you, Madam Secretary. But I didn't do it alone. There were so many others who stood up, who shared their stories. Exactly, Moore nodded. And that's the true measure of your impact. You gave others the courage to speak out, to demand change. That's the mark of a true leader. As Secretary Moore left, Andre found himself alone in his office, the weight of his new rank and the secretary's words settling on his shoulders. He walked to the window, looking out over the base that had been the stage for so much conflict and now so much progress. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. He turned to find Elliot, Grace, and several other members of his original support group entering, their faces alight with excitement. We heard the news, Major, Elliot grinned, emphasizing the new title. Looks like the brass finally got something right. Grace stepped forward, her eyes shining. Andre, we wanted you to know, what you've done, what you started, it's changing lives. I've had young soldiers come to me, telling me they feel seen for the first time, that they believe they have a real shot at a future in the military. As his friends shared stories of the changes they were witnessing, Andre felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was more than he could have ever imagined when he first decided to speak out against injustice. Later that night, surrounded by his family and closest friends in a small celebration, Andre looked around the room. His parents, beaming with pride. Tara, excitedly discussing her plans for the academy. Elliot, Grace, and the others who had stood by him through it all. Raising his glass, Andre spoke, his voice thick with emotion. To all of you who had the courage to stand up for what's right. To those who came before us, who faced discrimination with dignity and paved the way for this moment. And to the future, a military where every soldier is judged solely on their merit and character. As the glasses clinked together, Andre felt a profound sense of hope. The fight wasn't over. There would always be more work to do, more battles to fight. But they had made real, lasting change. And as he looked at the faces around him, at the next generation represented by Tara, he knew that the future was bright. Andre Coleman had set out to right a personal injustice and ended up transforming an entire institution. As he stood there, surrounded by love and support, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him, but for the entire military. The journey ahead would be challenging, but with determination, courage, and integrity, they would forge a path towards true equality and justice for all who served.